are you guys?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Very well, very well. Good to meet you.
Good to meet you as well. Where are you today?
I am in Colombo in Sri Lanka at the moment. So final day here, just having a little bit of a visit. I'm as you know, Yan Sen, I'm kind of on a big journey. So I'm traveling around, just visiting countries I've never been before, and every place is getting the 3 day treatment basically. So here for 3 days, then I go to KL tomorrow, where I'll be for 2 days. Then I go to Georgetown, and in fact, I'm very tempted to swing by Singapore also. We might be in the same vicinity, same place, and if so, obviously, it'd be great to meet in person. But that's TBC. I've got no sort of things booked after the 10th, but I've just got to figure out where I'm going to go after that.
Hey, Singapore is the heart of Asia. You gotta make a pit stop. For
I
sure.
know.
Yeah, it'll be
Yeah,
great to
yeah.
see
This
you in person.
increasingly, I'm feeling this. So even though wasn't the original plan, but I think wow, it's been like 6 years plus since I've last been in Sing. So I've got to go.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, sounds like you're on a great adventure. Thanks for making the time to speak with us. First thing before we kind of kick off, I want to kind of preface this a podcast to the audience. This is very much a reflection of our magazine, Makana 2.0. And the idea is very much about bringing ideas from our network to our network in the areas of HR, talent acquisition, technology, business, and leadership. With a focus on Japan, but as well as Asia. And in this particular case, I think we'll talk a lot about global trends as well. And so with that said, Hung, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
No, my pleasure, Yan Sen. I appreciate you inviting me on. Delighted to speak with you.
Yeah, you have a huge followership on LinkedIn and your newsletter. So I've been, reading ferociously for the past few months following your work. But for those that don't know you, do you want to quickly introduce yourself and tell us who you are?
Yeah, sure. So I still self-identify as a recruiter, even though it's been probably a decade since I've last worked a proper recruitment job and sent candidates to hiring managers and so on. But my history has been working in the talent acquisition space, agency side, in-house. Did some recruitment technology as well. Launched a tech startup back in the day. It didn't work, but from that sort of technology product, I ended up doing a lot of community-related work. So what is Recruiting Brainfood today? It's a newsletter, it's a podcast, online community. I see my job as basically going to events, making events, creating conversational spaces, ultimately to try and increase the pipes through which conversation and information flow. Because I think that helps everyone get a little bit better, a little bit smarter. And if I can just kind of do that, then I think that's as much as I can contribute to the industry in this phase of my career.
Yeah, I think with with a lot of clients that I work with and companies in general, I must say, they see recruiting as a function of just getting CVs and getting candidates through. But recruiting is just so much more, right? We could add so much value. And so through your newsletter and through your podcast and the work that you do, you really highlight the value in this particular function.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think it's one of those functions that basically it may have evolved right in the beginning pretty much as just a CV passing type of function. Probably our history doesn't help with that in the sense that that may have been the original function of recruiting back in the days when personnel was managing it. But obviously since that time we've become much more aware of how important people are to the success of business. And I think most successful business leaders would recognize that there's no more important and a tribute to a successful company than the people you have working in it. So certainly it's a transformed function from then till now.
before we dive into the meat of the conversation, which is your newsletter, I'm curious to get a little bit of background. How do you do your research for the content that you publish?
You know what? Most people have a totally different sort of understandings to how I do it, because it's actually really simple. So I don't deep dive into any research. I don't have a research team. I don't kind of dive into any of this. It's really more a case of just being in the middle of places where information is going to flow at me. So how I kind of describe this is with a fishing analogy, Yan Sen. Essentially, instead of like being a guy who is using a sharp shooting the fish in a river, I just stand in the middle of the river where I know there's a lot of fish. And my job is to be able to pick out those sort of bits of information which I think are interesting, and also stuff that perhaps other people might not be able to spot. So, I don't see any purpose in recycling mainstream stuff, because any decent recruiter is already going to be reading these things. So, you don't need me to constantly recycle that. That's pointless. What I'll do is try and pick out some of the more niche voices, maybe from outside industry that have observations that are still relevant to us, maybe from completely different domains that still have an application in the recruiting space. That's the stuff I think is super interesting, and that's typically what makes it into the newsletter.
Fantastic. And for us, we like to kind of recycle your work, but we like to put our spin into it as well from a Japan perspective, and so that's how we kind of find value from the information that you share. So going into the newsletter, I want to talk about the 20 predictions of recruiting in 2025, and this list, I think we could spend 3-4 hours talking about this. But we'll try to synthesize and squeeze it into about an hour. And for those that haven't seen the list, definitely check out Hung's newsletter, because it's very, very novel. Like a lot of the concepts and ideas, I don't, again, hear in the mainstream media. But now that I look at it, it makes sense. And I do see some of these trends trickling in to Japan. Japan is known to be 5-10 years behind the curve, but I think with the advent of AI, we are starting to see the light that if we don't catch up, it's gonna go past us, and we're not going to be able to catch up in the future. So this is a long list, Hung. I don't know. Maybe we could just kind of go through them one by one and just kind of talk about interesting points, and have some comments on this list as well. Is that okay with you?
Totally okay.
Okay. So point 1, AI assessment mainstreams. 50% of high volume hires will have a solution in place by end of year.
Yes.
Skill-based hiring is going to take off. Percentage of employers describing themselves as skill-based hiring increases 50%.
So we can discuss these one by one as you go through, or if you prefer, we can wait, sort of do it all at one go. Yeah, Yan Sen, which would you prefer to do?
Yeah, I think we could kind of maybe group a bunch of them together. So for the sake of time, it could be more efficient. What do you think? What is the best approach?
Yeah, I think so. If you look at 1 to 4, they're probably all to do with like application rate. So job seeker application rate increasing, and 1 to 4 basically how companies might respond to those. So if you want, I can dive into maybe even 1 to 5 could be described as that. So yeah, happy to discuss this. I mean, the first point is high volume hiring, meaning organizations that typically do seasonal hiring or they episodic hiring where there's a big surge. Graduate recruitment is often, part of that group. Where you're doing bulk hires really at high volume of small amount of roles. So you're not just hiring a big diversity of roles. You're hiring, hundreds, maybe thousands of people for a particular function. I do think that companies that are in that position will have implemented some sort of AI assessment in their recruitment flow. By the end of the year, I've said at least 50% would have done it. And the reason why is because I don't think that they can continue without a solution of some kind. I had a really interesting conversation with a supermarket chain, multinational supermarket chain. I gave a private keynote for their AGM, and it turned out that they projected 6.7 million applications directly into their recruiter email inboxes by the end of at the end of last year. And I was thinking, okay, I don't know how many recruiters you have, but let's say you have 1,000 recruiters. If you're getting 6.7 million applications into your inbox, that inbox is nuked, Yan Sen. Like, you can no longer use your email if that's what's happening. So I think, okay, what is going on is companies will deploy some sort of tool, like an assessment tool, something that's going to divert the candidate into a place where they have to interact with the chatbot, interact with a voice sort of interviewer, interact with some sort of games-based assessment, whatever the flavor you have. You're going to get that because there's no other way really to control the applicant flow other than just not advertising at all and finding an alternative means to secure those people. But for high volume hiring, you can't really do sourcing for that. You do need to advertise, in which case I think you're going to have to meet it with AI-based assessment. On point three.
So on some of these assessments, I think you kind of listed. How good are they right now from your perspective?
They're surprisingly good. I was a skeptic. Before I tested them myself, I was a super skeptic. I thought, surely, speaking to computer or having some interaction, I don't want to do this. But I tested some like voice interviewer type software, and I was just super impressed by how they were able to understand my CV, compare it against the job application, actually interview me against sort of the key criteria that was in the job description, and either reject or pass me through based on my responses. And I was like, I thought the conclusions were quite fair, to be honest. I thought, okay, they've rejected me in the same way a human recruiter would have done that pre-screening call. A pre-screening call isn't something that's particularly in-depth or forensic. It's me calling you up and saying, hey, Yan Sen, can you drive a car? Do you have a valid driving license? Do you have any experience driving in Japan? Basic stuff that might knock you in or out of a process. And AI can do that. There's no reason for a human being to make that call. The difference is, of course, is that the AI solution is infinitely scalable. Whereas a human recruiter, there's no way you could staff up a recruitment team to be able to make that volume of calls. Whereas it could be a single instance of an AI implementation that could do 24/7 any number of these calls that you see fit. And the killer kind of advantage, not the killer advantage, but the thing that really kind of puts this over the edge in terms of usability is that the candidates really prefer it, which was initially surprising to me. But it turned out that actually the candidates can self-schedule when they want to do the call, for instance, which anybody can understand is going to be preferable to having to book a time with a human recruiter and then have to stick to that time. It's like you can literally do the call whenever you want. And secondly, because it's voice only, I felt that it was actually easier to do the call when you're doing a multitask. So, right now, for instance, you and I are having this conversation. We've put our mics on. We're kind of like prepared for the call and all this. And it's actually excess work to have done all of that. Whereas you can imagine, especially remember this high volume hiring. So it could be like warehouse working. It could be, general labor. It could be lots of different things that, where the people involved doing those jobs or doing that activity could be students, for instance, on a summer job and stuff like this. You don't really want to have huge amounts of front-loaded commitment for these conversations. It's more a case of, okay, availability, yes. Can I do it? Yes. Is the pay right? Yes. Okay, great. I'm probably more or less in. So that first pre-screen for high volume hiring, I think voice is going to be the way to do it. So yeah, I became convinced having tested a few, and it's not only voice. There's other ways to do it. There's text-based type of assessments also. There's game-based assessments I mentioned too. Some of them are even like functional based, where they try to do work assessments over the mobile phone, scenario-based stuff. But yeah, I think companies that are hiring at that type of scale are aggressively looking to implement something, and I think 50% will have something in place by the end of this year.
Yeah, awesome. That's fantastic. So I imagine this being a relatively new technology, or maybe in your eyes, not so new. There's still some false positives and screening out of potential candidates, right? So in your mind, do you think is it 90% accurate, 95%, or is it like 99% accurate right now?
I don't know about accuracy, but I also don't think it's that important. And this is where we put the cynical hat on. Of course, we want 100% accuracy all the time. But then you compare that to a human recruiter making that call, and you think, how accurate was that ever? Especially if they were hugely pressured to do the volume. If you had to hire 100 candidates on a day, you're going to make 100 screening calls. You're not making accurate decisions, man. You're just trying to hit that number. So I think it's going to be more accurate than an under pressure recruiter. And let's not forget that this is not always like the definitive decision. It could be for certain jobs where, you have a very low kind of threshold for entry, where actually, showing up is the most important thing, then yeah, sure. But in that case, you don't need to be super accurate in any case. What the function of these assessments do is to reduce the numbers of individuals that you're asking a human recruiter to handle. If I'm piping in 6.7 million applications into people's inboxes, that recruiter has to handle like tens of thousands of applications. No chance that's happening. So what tech like this does is reduce that number to a manageable number. Maybe you can set it to, okay, you could configure it actually. So you can say, look, I need, most of these AI assessment tools have a scoring mechanism in there. And so you could configure those tools to say, right, I only want to see the responses of I only want to see the candidates that meet my threshold of 95%. And then you've got a number that you can then, individually investigate as a human to human, and be a lot more forensic as to quality control. So it's basically there to convert a large volume into a smaller number.
Got it. Point two, which is skill-based hiring. From my perspective, it's very time-consuming, very, very complex, and many of the requirements change before you could fully assess all of the different skills that are being assessed in skills-based hiring. Tell us how AI has been able to kind of improve on these points.
Okay, so I can see you're a cynic when it comes to skills-based hiring.
Was it obvious?
I'm the same. I'm also a cynic. And my prediction here is actually quite a cynical prediction. Because you're right, skills-based hiring is extremely time-consuming. And it probably isn't worth the effort for most types of companies. There's only certain types of companies where skills-based hiring is super optimized for. And most companies is probably not that. However, what I think will happen is that a lot of companies, should I say, will adopt the label of skills-based hiring as essentially rhetorical cover for their implementation of AI-based assessments up front. So one of the ways in which you can describe our use of AI assessments is not because we want to reduce the amount of people that we're processing, because that sounds bad. What we might want to say is that, we've gone down the skills-based hiring route, therefore we're going to assess people on skills early, and that we're only going to deal with people that are coming through. But I think the label skills-based hiring will basically be used to describe the implementation of AI-based assessments for high volume hirers. So that's where I think skills-based hiring comes back. probably there's a little bit of cynicism as to, you know, are you in the spirit of skills-based hiring, shall we say? I would say probably not. But they'll use the label of skills-based hiring because it has a more positive connotation than, you know, managing candidate flow, for instance.
Got it. Point three, two-factor authentication. I just learned a new term there. So this is very much what I'm seeing is a cat and mouse between applicant and hiring manager, right? So the past year, AI mass apply was a huge thing, and it bombarded recruiters and hiring managers alike. And so now coming into this year, 2FA, that's the new technology that's going to try to eliminate the least applicable applicants.
Actually, old technology, because two-factor authentication basically is security, like security type software. It's basically, are you a human being? You know, sometimes you log into a website, you get a little pop-up to say, okay, can you play a little game, or can you kind of click a checkbox? It captures stuff like that is kind of in the same vicinity as two-factor authentication. Two-factor authentication is simply they'll send you a confirmation message to a secondary device you have, typically your mobile phone. So you might receive a text message to say, hey, you've just tried to log into your banking website. Is this really you, Yan Sen? And then you say, yes, it is. And then the website will let you in. So I think two-factor authentication basically will be deployed again to try and deal with the applicant flow issue. I've already seen some examples of this. Captcha will do as well. So these are all like testing whether the applicant is a human being. And the way they do that is basically to confirm at that moment, because the test is usually time bound, whether the person who's actually applying is actually right there and then. I spoke to an ATS actually just a week ago, and they mentioned they've already implemented a similar feature within their internal system because they're getting the requests from their customers that they're getting overloaded with applicants. And so they've implemented Captcha, which is essentially a similar version of security. Basically, I'm not sure whether the analogy goes through exactly right to a Japanese audience, but it's basically a game you play online to confirm that you're a human being, and that's being implemented natively by ATSs. So I think two-factor authentication basically is the cheapest way in which sort of employers are going to control this applicant deluge, because the applicant deluge is going to increase. I mean, we thought 2024 is bad. 2025 is going to be even worse, quote unquote worse, because the technology to do so will get better. And so candidates' ability to use AI mass supply will improve, it'll spread, it'll become more ubiquitous. It's already global as well, so we have to factor in, globally how many people might be using these technologies. Then of course we're going to be inundated. So the advertising funnel as a recruiting funnel is going to be reworked with a lot more filtration, essentially. And two factors are going to be one of those techniques.
I think points 6 to 10, we could also group together, and this is very much around the change of the talent acquisition team, right? Moving from non-FTE moving from FTE to non-FTE, and having the percentage of solo TA functions increase, et cetera, et cetera. Did you want to highlight some key points within these areas?
Yeah, so I think these points are all about sort of how the talent acquisition function itself is going to respond to the massive changes that have occurred in hiring demand over the last 5 years or so. So we've seen like a number of big moments where we've had to cut aggressively, in the COVID era, for instance, tons of layoffs, including within TA, by the way. Talent acquisition, of course, was one of the first departments to be cut, most heavily so because the company's not hiring anymore during the pandemic. Of course, we're the first to go, rightly so, by the way. And then we had, the post-lockdown mini boom, where everyone was charging forward, and the world's going to build back better, and this remote-only utopia, massive search requirements. We had hugely expanded TA teams, so we had this like complete reversal from the pandemic period. And then, of course, we had 2022, which turned out to be very significant year, I believe, historically, because a number of things occurred there. Basically, three things occurred. Number one, outbreak of war in Ukraine, and the kind of U.S. European Western response to that basically sets us on a train of a deglobalizing world. That's going to obviously reduce economic growth globally. And we're still on that trend, by the way. So we can't be like overly positive as to where we're going with this. Technically, we had released a ChatGPT, of course, which gave people the idea that, oh, hey, looks like we're finally here with AI. Perhaps AI can do a lot of the work that previously humans were doing. That's going to have a suppressant effect on hiring demand. And thirdly, we had kind of these interest rate rises in the US. I think Japan, very different environment, of course. We always need to special case Japan, I believe. But the rest of the world, more or less, at least the Western world certainly, had this real increase of cost of living, which is also a cost of business. So, cost of living increases, cost of business increases. Guess what? If you're a CEO or manager of any department with a P&L and your costs have gone up, then you're going to think, okay, how do I reduce those costs? How do I get more streamlined? How do I do more with less? And so those pressures apply also to TA. TA leaders are pressured to do more with less. That means like not increasing the headcount of the team. That means using more automation. That means making use of non-full-time employees. So we have a growth of freelancer recruiters, interim recruiters, RPO type people coming in to response back. Even the use of agencies might increase because of the kind of the need to apply sort of labor to the business need, but you don't have the internal capacity because you cut it back so hard as you have. So you have no slack, and other sort of cost cutting techniques would be offshoring different parts of the TA function. We saw that again in COVID, but I think one of the impacts of the pandemic was that it kind of taught everyone how to do remote, which obviously we all enjoy. I'm working remotely now. I wouldn't be having this conversation with you, Yan Sen, if that wasn't the case. But the negative aspect of this is that, suddenly we've taught everyone how to do remote. Then the big question is, where do we then locate the jobs? Because there's no difference in me managing someone who's always remote if they're based in London versus Johannesburg. It turns out Johannesburg is like 3 times cheaper. So why don't I just locate the jobs there? So I think a geographical dispersal of jobs is occurring within TA. And we're going to basically be positioning jobs where they can be done most efficiently. And that means taking them out of expensive places and putting them into cheaper places.
Yeah, you raised a good point because, Japan is kind of like opposite world, right? We have low inflation, low interest rate, and the cost of living is low compared to the rest of the world. So whenever I travel to North America, to Europe,
painful.
Oh my goodness, it's like double or sometimes even triple, right? You need to pay.
Yeah. Jansen, let me tell you this. I've been like carrying out a very small experiment where I've decided to, sort of last year to go out regularly and have lunches with people. And I wanted to test the retail cost of it. So I was like, okay, there's a bunch of restaurants that are at this level, they're not mass market, but they're not like fine dining. They're kind of slightly above, stuff that you'd probably be able to casually do, 2-3 times a week with work colleagues or friends. And I was, every single time I went, it seemed that it was going up in terms of price, like 10%, 5%, another 10% on a weekly or monthly basis. And I was thinking, whoa, we're getting to the point where we cannot casually do this anymore because it's turning into like an expense such that you need to plan for it. Like it needs to be a celebration. Certainly, it's not like, hey, Yan Sen, let's go for lunch. No, it's like, okay, let's go at the
Put
end
in
of the
my
month.
calendar
So,
6 months in advance.
yeah,
Book that in,
exactly.
right? Yeah.
And everyone knows this. So the increase of cost of living in UK, I think US as well, probably most of Europe has been at least 30% over the last 2 years. That's the real increase of cost of living on the most important things: food, energy, rent. And yeah, that's hurt people on the bottom line, man, and it's hurt businesses basically that are energy intensive. It also increases wage pressure, obviously, because if people are coming in and saying, hey, listen, my costs have gone up 30%. You're going to have to give me something, boss. You're going to have to give me something. So, it's been really, really tough in certain parts of the world for sure.
So it's really interesting because Japan has really turned into a place where people come to do shopping sprees, right? Tourism's through the roof, and you walk the streets of any major city. You hear a lot of English being spoken, and you're like, wow, Japan's starting to globalize. It's very international, and you see foreigners all over the place. But what's really interesting is the opposite is true in my mind, because Japan is deglobalization to a certain extent as well. Because if you imagine the students in the Japanese education
They
system,
can't
they
go.
can't
Yeah.
afford to go overseas anymore, right? They
Yeah.
need to be
Yeah.
stuck in the Japanese education system. So they're going to be less motivated to learn English. They're not going to be able to kind of see the dream of being able to kind of build their career in kind of the global workforce. And so they're like, okay, I'm just going to be content with just Japan. And yeah, this is kind of a trend that I'm seeing that could have some serious implications down the line.
Very interesting observation, Jansen. I'd love to actually learn more about the Japanese economy from you and other people. In fact, on my journey, I might actually pop into Japan on my way because again, I'm going to be in Asia till May, right? So it's like I got time. And
Hey, $6 or $7 for a nice healthy lunch, without tip. So yeah, this is where you could splurge on a daily basis.
dude, that would get you an apple in New York. I'm not joking. It would literally be an apple.
Right. Okay. Going back to kind of your list here, I think 11, 15, candidate resentment stabilizes with 2% either side of 2004 levels. US explicit retrench, Europe implicit progress. Any of these points that you want to dive a little bit more into?
Yeah, sure. So candidate resentment is one of my favorite measures in our industry. It's like a really weird term.
How do you
But
measure that?
I don't measure it. The guy called Kevin Grossman measures it.
Okay.
So Kevin is a friend of mine that runs the Candidate Experience Awards. And every year, and I think for the last 10 years, he's measured this metric. And it's a survey. The survey question is very simple. It asks job candidates whether you would basically have nothing to do with that company because your experience as a job candidate was so poor that you will never ever interact with that company ever again at any consumer level, and you'd actually go so far as to recommend that your friends don't go forward to any job opportunities with that sort of brand as well. So that resentment, it's no longer like I've had a bad service. It's like you're now activated to be a hostile against that brand. So he's measured this over time, and I think the 2024 results was record number of people said, yes, I have this feeling against a certain company, 24% or so, something like this. So very high number. Now I have kind of Kevin actually contradicted me, by the way, himself. So I have said that it will stabilize. So I think this upward curve of resentment, I think, stabilizes in 2025. He thinks it's going to keep going on. So he is the guy that probably knows better because he's the person compiling it. But my thesis on this is that I believe that because we've had such a difficult job market in certain sectors of the economy for a long period of time, I have a theory that candidates will disperse the blame elsewhere. So there's an interesting sociological phenomena where you can only hate a certain thing for so long before the crowd kind of moves to a different thing to hate. It can no longer accept the previous sort of nemesis, so to say. So I think, unfortunately, particularly in the US, this is US data, by the way, so I should caveat that, is that obviously we have change of government in the United States. We have all kinds of cultural changes also. I think it's Trump 2.0 is obviously going to be a revolutionary government. It's overturning so many things. I believe that essentially the resentment will be redirected to something else. So I think what Trump will be able to do, it would be to redirect the candidate resentment away from companies and toward other things. Let's say immigration, or let's say some other, external other that will be created to do it. So yeah, I think it'll stabilize because most people think, you know what, it's not this company's fault, it's those people's fault. So the resentment will stay high, just be redirected.
I see your earlier point being connected to this one because, with inflation, I think employers are expecting more from their employees, right? And so I see the job description grow, the role and responsibility list grow, requirements grow. Sometimes, what used to be 2 jobs, they're now 1. They're like, okay, yeah, you could double hat, you could triple hat. And that's going to justify the increase in salary and cost of the hire, right? And so with that, the employee is like, wait a minute here. You're giving me a 30% increase, but you basically giving me double the work, 2-person's job. That's not good. So I'm seeing that reflected in employee satisfaction. There's burnout, right, happening in the industry. And that's actually a driver for people moving on to another role. Does this kind of sound accurate, or am I just kind of living in another world?
I think we're all staring at a very complicated thing. I mean, I'm reminded of that the parable of the 3 blind men who were trying to identify the elephant. And they're all just touching a different part of the elephant and describing obviously a totally different creature. I think we're all like this, no one sees the full elephant. So I including me, I'm just seeing like a foot of the elephant. We're all just like having a look. So I think every perspective is valid. In fact, I'm a big fan of having more people talk about things because you're bringing in new perspectives that I'm totally outside of my imagination. This is all very healthy stuff. Now, what you mentioned, I think, is true. Jobs are getting kind of it's a classic way to cut sort of cost out of your business, obviously. And in a weird way, the ones that are left have to embrace it. I mean, even though it's really tough, but looking at the TA example, recruiter example, I know a lot of recruiters that have inherited a classic HR type responsibilities on top of their recruitment. So now they're doing payroll, now they're doing benefits, now they're also doing L&D and stuff. And people have asked me, said, "Oh, should I really take this? I'm not getting any more money." I said, "Yeah, you take it. You take it. Because if you don't, you're going to get turfed. You're just going to get chucked out because they're going to try and replace you. And secondly, you're expanding your indispensability within the business." So if you manage to make it work with AI, let's say, so you've managed to combine the work of 2 people into one, you've managed to do it, but you've also implemented artificial intelligence automation such that it's not absolutely crushing you in terms of time, then I think you're in a very, very strong position going forward because you're providing the productivity that previously 2 people did, and you now become much more difficult to get rid of because you're covering more work and more function. So yes, I think you have to take the job and complain about getting the comp. I think you should absolutely be strong in arguing for that. But don't say, I would say it's a mistake to refuse it because basically employers have the strength in this market right now.
And point 16 is the doom and gloom of the entire list. 10% decline in profits of global staffing agencies in 2025. You're probably not making many friends with that prediction.
No, but I'm super confident in this one. And that's not sort of being like that's not being unkind to the big staffing firms. By the way, I need to caveat that we're talking about global staffing firms here. So I do think that actually micro firms will do okay in certain sectors, and I think there'll be a mini recovery in different parts of the market. But the global guys with global exposure, they're the ones that will continue to trend down simply because the global economy is not going to grow as they thought that it would. They're all set up for a growth economy, right? Those big global players, the Randstads, the Page Groups, all of those teleservices, they have sort of massive coverage everywhere, but they're set up for a global economy that's going to grow at like on average 4 to 5% growth overall. That's how they're set up to grow. It ain't going to go that way. I mean, Trump today has launched like a tariff war against Canada, Mexico, and increased on China. Guess what? He's going to go through every single day of the week, launching a new tariff war with another country. That's going to produce counter tariffs. That's going to create more friction on trade. That's going to just slow down economic growth. That's a simple fact. So I think that those staffing firms will continue to crunch down. We're going to watch like a hawk their kind of public statements at the end of Q1, because by then we will know when they start to publicly speak to their investors where they're at with their business. I think there's a huge amount of reorganization required for those types of organizations. They're all going to survive. They're too big to fail, right? They're all going to do okay in that way. I think they're going to be remodeled. They're going to be much more tech-enabled going forward, but they've got a lot more people to shed before they get there.
I know it's been many years since you were actually doing recruitment, but what are some of the action points you think these firms can take to maybe bounce back a little bit quicker or mitigate some of this risk in the economy?
Well, no, I think they're already doing it. There's no so I'm not. This is everything I've said so far. I think is like I don't think they're being complacent. There's some very talented people that know what they're doing that are in charge. It just takes a long time for them to recalibrate for what this world is going to look like. By the way, none of us knew that Trump was going to get in on November, right? I mean, you could guess it, but if Trump hadn't gone through, we'd have a different timeline. So almost if you're a CEO of a global business, is like you can only hedge so much. You've got to kind of put your bets on red or black at some point. Now it's turned out to be this type of color. What it means is those companies will need to automate aggressively. They need to remove a lot of their processes currently, which are still very dependent on heavy labor intensity. So for instance, business development. If you speak to any recruitment agency globally, they'll say business development top priority. We need more we need more leads, right? We need more clients, we need more customers and all this type of stuff. That's the demand. But how are they doing this? Most of them are still doing it the old way. Telephone call, email, trying to just hustle by extra work. Yes, you need to do that. But these days, there's technologies which can massively accelerate your capabilities in effective business development. It's one of the most obvious ways in which artificial intelligence is helping is actually top of funnel for recruitment agencies. So probably like a unstated but kind of consequential prediction of the collapse in profit will be mass automation of business development by these companies because they'll invest in tools that are able to track and even predict when a company is hiring. They'll invest in tools that will do data enrichment and try and do automated research to find out who is in charge of what particular function. They may even do automated outreach. Because what's the point in having a human caller make a dial when the chances of the person picking up are like less than 1%? You might as well have an automated function doing this. So we're not there yet, right? This is still like very advanced when you talk about automated pipelining, but this will come. So the good thing from all of this is that those staffing firms will kind of emerge from it with a much more sophisticated BD function after this period, painful though it may be.
When you talk about that, what comes to mind for me is how the TA function has really changed, right? I think for me, any TA professional now needs to be a technology futurist. They need to be a data scientist. They need to be a storyteller. They need to manage stakeholders. They need to have really smart EQ. They need to have labor law knowledge. They need to understand the global geopolitical nuances, all of these things in combination. It's really, really complex now.
It is, but I think this is also a positive. So the more complex the job is, the actually more insulated you are from being replaced by AI anyway. So if we zoom out from all of this and say, yeah, right, it's currently hard. You know what? It is, but this is like a training for the future. It's almost like we're all in a gym, or we're all in the Shaolin monastery or something. We're getting our backs beaten by the monks trying to train us. Yes, it's hard. It's unpleasant. But the point is we're getting like fit for the AI-enabled future. And I think, as you described, the complexity and the diversity of role is going to be one of the main reasons why your job is more resilient to AI than something that is very simple and homogeneous. Like if you're doing one activity over and over again, that's your key function. Good chance that's automatable. Very, very good chance. In fact, it's almost certain it is. Where AI struggles is when the job is super complex. The different functions are interwoven with each other. So, for instance, let's say your EQ is great, but your EQ actually is also determined a little bit on your domain knowledge, right? So your ability to know a particular industry, along with your EQ, those two things interweave to make you a super credible person. You can't have one without the other. AI will struggle with that type of interweaving, even though obviously as artificial intelligence accelerates away, what we're saying today may not be true tomorrow. But it's still the case that the more complicated your job, the more diverse the tasks in your job, the better it is for you going forward.
Point 19, somebody Uberizes the legions of fractional TAs out there. So there's obviously been a lot of retrenching in the TA function over the past few years. You're predicting a massive agency.
Well, honestly, I've even named them. I mean, I'm not sure whether this gets me into trouble, but I think Indeed again. I have no inside knowledge. I caveat all of this. But the reasons why I think it will happen is because, firstly, if you track how the business model of job boards, they're progressively moving towards how an agency makes money. So we had the era of pay per post. You pay a sort of a flat fee for an advert. It stays up there for 30 days. That's the deal, right? Pay per post, duration-based ads. Then we thought, okay, we don't want this because, I don't know what results I'm getting. Why don't we go pay per click? That means that you only pay if you get lots of people interested in your ad response. Isn't that better? Okay, great. We went pay per click. Then we realized, okay, we're getting lots of clicks, but they're all bad clicks. I'm still not getting applications. Then we went pay per apply. So in other words, you only pay when you get applicants into your system. Then again, we complain to say, yeah, but the applicants are all terrible. How do I, I'm paying a lot of money for applicants that actually I'm never going to hire. Then we went to pay per qualified hire. So you connect your job board or you connect your job distribution with your ATS, and you're only paying for candidates that have gone through the job board that you then move through your ATS. So you only pay for guys that make the first interview, and then maybe you only pay for the guys that make the second interview. So all of this trends towards pay per hire, right? It trends to the point where, okay, you got a free service, you don't pay anything, or maybe you pay a small subscription to be part of it, but you only pay if you basically hire the person, and we can track that because it's in your ATS, and your ATS is offer management type stuff. Great, you hook it up. We can prove that it's through us, sort of that you've got the candidate. We'll just charge you, I don't know, 10%, far lower than you would get an agency. Would you take the deal? Most companies, employers would pay 10%. They pay 20% already, even more, 30%, I think, in Japan. So they pay if the hire is made, pay on results. And so I think what will happen is that job boards are trending this way. The biggest job board, if Indeed don't like me calling them that, but in terms of the functionalities, are them. They're already launching things that are very similar to this, where they've got sort of matching services instead of just job ads. Where we don't want to expose every job ad to every candidate. That creates this applicant chaos that we talked about earlier. Wouldn't be better if we use AI to figure out which candidates are going to be most suitable or most interested to which jobs, and then limit the amount of exposure that we have on each side, just increase the relevancy. Both sides should be happy with this. Okay, great. Suddenly this sounds a lot more like agency stuff, right? Where we're not exposing all of the market to all of the candidates, but we're using our knowledge on the job and on the candidate to figure out which is the match. And then I guess the final component of all of this is that it cannot be a fully automated system, because there's always going to be situations where human beings are going to have to white glove this all the way through the process. The automated matching is great, but we found out through the talent marketplace era, which is the last, probably from 2010 onwards to 2015, there was loads of talent marketplaces, Hired.com being the most famous one, of course, but many others that were out there, Vettery, TripleByte, HackerJob. I launched, my tech platform was also one of those hiring marketplaces. We all discovered the same thing, Yan Sen, which was automated matching, no matter how accurate, was not sufficient for conversations to occur. Right, it still needed some human triage to white glove the situation through. And what those talent marketplaces ended up doing was hiring ex-recruiters to become talent advisors, quote unquote. And the talent advisors were people who basically sat in between, monitoring the system, looking at the automated matching, then monitored where the conversations were or were not happening, and then jumped in to say, hey, listen, I'm working for the neutral platform. My job is to make sure that both parties are satisfied with this experience. Can you tell us a little bit more about what it is you're looking for, and we'll see whether this fit is absolutely right. If not, we're going to find something else. Candidate's going to love that experience because they're suddenly getting this concierge. Employer loves that experience because they don't have to do the outreach. What will happen is that some mega company, probably Indeed, maybe someone else, LinkedIn could do it, but it has to be mega scale, will sign up all of the fractional TAs that are currently out there, all of the recruiters that are out there, even people like you and me, Yan Sen, who are busy with stuff. Probably no problem with us signing up. We're not working full time for them. We're Uberizing this, right? So we can decide not to work this. So when you have the Uberize experience, it makes sense simply to sign up if the entrance fee is really cheap. And we'll simply bid on the jobs as they come in. And we'll say in the same way an Uber does. And we've got the chance then of basically becoming a recruitment agent for a very short period of time on a per deal basis. And I think that will be a very successful outcome, because it will mean that recruiters will suddenly resolve a lot of the business development challenges they have, because the platform's going to service the jobs to them. And depending on your level of motivation, interest, or speciality, you could find yourself in a fairly non-competitive space. It's similar, like an Uber driver is going to figure out which territory he or she drives the car in, or which time of the day that's suitable for their working circumstances. They're more or less guaranteed to work because not everyone has those same circumstances. So I would never compete with you in Japanese market. Don't speak Japanese, don't know anything about the Japanese recruiter market. I could not compete even if I wanted to. So you're then competing with only the Japanese recruiters that have signed to this platform. And again, you then just narrow it down even further to say, maybe I recruit only for this segment, and only look out for this type of thing or whatnot. And boom, you might be able to just slap in some hires fairly easily, and off you go. So yeah, I think someone's going to do it. I've mentioned already who is prime position to do it. Whether they do it or not, I don't know. But there we go.
Yeah. No, when I first read this piece on your newsletter, I thought, oh, doesn't really make any sense. Because if you're only having one agency or two agencies, then how are you going to headhunt? Because everybody's going to be a client, and you're not going to be able to headhunt, and it wouldn't be a viable business model. But the way you've kind of articulated it and put it, it makes complete sense. And I think, yeah, if that does come to become reality, I'll sign up just like you. And actually, we're actually seeing a lot of the job boards in Japan already have this model where they're charging agencies as well as enterprise companies a percentage of successful placements. So
Really, very, very interesting. I think Japan will always have its independent ecosystem, by the way. Japan, I had a good friend of mine, a Japanese friend who I recruited from Japan, actually moved to London. And he was telling me about how the tech ecosystem is totally unique there. I remember sort of Yahoo Japan, for instance, classically was like just constantly still there. And I think, what? That's like, how is that the case? But he was saying, again, very educational. And yeah, Japan is similar. It's not similar to any other sort of country. I think you always have the special case Japan, simply because it's gone its own way. And probably there'll be a very interesting local provider that will do something similar to what I've described, but purely for the Japanese market.
It is an island country, so it's kind of created a moat around itself, isolated the rest of the world. A lot of the requirements for the jobs require a certain level of Japanese, right? And one and two JLPT, and so that's kind of protected Japan from a talent perspective. Hung, I know we're coming up to the end of our 1 hour conversation. It felt like it went by in like 10 minutes. We'll probably have to do this again because there's so many things that I didn't have an opportunity to cover. But I want to kind of give you a couple of seconds at the end here, if our audience would like to kind of follow you and get to know your content more, how can they do that?
Yeah, if signing up to the newsletter is the right thing to do. So recruitingbrainfood.com. It's a weekly newsletter that comes out. In fact, I write 2 newsletters, so you can follow follow me on LinkedIn as well. You can get that second newsletter. It's a different type of play. But that's the best place to do it. I would say it's stuff like connect on LinkedIn, but I've maxed out the number of connections there, so I can't even accept anybody anymore.
I can't even connect with you. It's a shame. Anything exciting that you're working on the next month or two that maybe you want to plug?
I am on a journey. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, so I'm traveling around Asia Pac, particularly for my own education. So it's not a holiday per se, even though obviously I'm enjoying my time visiting different places. But I wanted to speak to local people, local recruiters, and learn from what they're doing there. So I've been to India and 3 places so far. I've been to Sri Lanka now. I'm going to go to Malaysia next week or later this week. Simply interacting with locals, figuring out what's going on, super educational, and I'm trying to just share what I learn as I go. Because one thing I think is true, there are universal kind of rules out there, but whenever they hit local conditions, the universal principle often refracts into a different direction. And whilst we should be understanding of what universal principles they may be, we have to be very conscious of how they may or may not apply or apply in a completely unexpected direction when they meet the local context. So local context is king. This is something that I think needs to be known more. I think people in Japan probably know this already, but people in the Western world tend to assume that everything is the same as what they assume is the case. Not the case. And so, my journey so far confirmed this every place where I go. So yeah, if there's a project, it's probably amplifying that message that we need to pay more attention to the people who are currently living and working in that particular territory or in that domain. They've got more to teach us than we have to teach them.
Thank you very much, Hung. I think you capped that off really, really well. And so, for us at Makana Partners, we're all about synthesizing your thoughts and making applicable for the Japan market. And with that, yes, thank you very much for joining us. Wishing you the best on the rest of your trip, and hopefully we can meet up in Singapore.